On Monday, a North Dakota judge dismissed riot charges against award-winning journalist Amy Goodman. Goodman had been originally charged with trespassing, but on Friday, a local prosecutor acknowledged the trespassing charges wouldn't stick and added a rioting charges to her rap sheet. A rally was held outside the North Dakota court, and at least one arrest was made. Hundreds have been arrested in actions against the Dakota Access Pipeline. Another journalist, including award-winning filmmaker Dea Schulzberg, was last week charged with 3 felony counts for covering a protest. She could face up to 45 years in jail. Here's Goodman's statement from outside the North Dakota courthouse, followed by our full interview with her, discussing the importance of independent reporting and First Amendment rights.
The judge's decision to reject the state's attorney, Ladd Erickson's, attempt to prosecute a journalist, in this case me, is a great vindication of the First Amendment and of our right to report. On September 3rd, the Democracy Now! Team came to North Dakota, to the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation, to the resistance camps, to cover this epic struggle. Native people on the front lines, particularly Native American women, on the front lines, who are taking on not only the Dakota Access Pipeline, but a global issue of climate justice, taking on the global issue of global warming. Democracy Now! Has been covering climate justice issues for the full 20 years that we have been broadcasting. We go to every UN climate summit. So often it's indigenous people on the front lines. We covered the Keystone XL pipeline. Now we're covering the Dakota Access Pipeline. And the important role of a journalist is to go to where the silence is. We should not be alone in the major media coming to cover this historic unification of Native Americans from more than 200 tribes from Latin America to the United States to Canada. All of the media should be there, given the scope of this struggle. And we encourage all of the media to come here. We certainly will continue to cover this struggle. It's not only to protect the water and land rights, but it's covering your right to speak, to be heard. We are not the only ones who have been charged. We faced misdemeanor. I faced misdemeanors. But I know there are a number of people who are going to court even as we speak here. Also important to point out other journalists who are being arrested. The state's attorney was attempting to stop journalism. The state's attorney must respect freedom of the press and the First Amendment. On September 3rd, we came to North Dakota and covered the Native Americans going down the road from the camp to plant their tribal flags at their burial ground. They were surprised to learn at their sacred ground, and I'm sure a number of you were there, that the Dakota Access Pipeline was actually actively excavating at that moment on this holiday weekend. They urged the bulldozers to stop. The security guards came out with their dogs and pepper spray. The dogs bit the protesters. Democracy Now! Videotaped the bloody dog with blood dripping from his mouth and his nose, biting not only protesters or protectors, the land and water protectors, but the Native Americans' horses as well. These images went viral. 14 million people almost immediately saw these images around the world. All of the networks then published, then played excerpts of that video. CBS Evening News, NBC, MSNBC, CNN, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, BBC, NPR. And it went on from there. We call that trickle-up journalism. The state cannot stop this journalism. The state must not stop this journalism. Violating the First Amendment is not good for North Dakota. It's not good for this country. I want to, we together, and I want to point out my colleagues, the Democracy Now! Team, John Hamilton, who continues to film today, as he has been filming with us. Laura Gottesdiener. Laura, where are you? Laura, wave your hand, who is tireless in her reporting on these issues. And Dennis Moynihan behind me, who is, this team was so critical in bringing out the story. I also want to thank Hani Massoud, and again, our lawyers Reed Brody and Tom Dixon. Most importantly, I want to thank everybody for being here, for showing up, for standing up for freedom of the press. And standing up for freedom of the press goes beyond journalism. Freedom of the press is about the public's right to know. That right to know is sacred. That's what makes a democracy meaningful, when you are able to make informed decisions. We've got to open up the media to everyone's voice. I see the media as a huge kitchen table that stretches across the globe, that we all sit around and debate and discuss the critical issues of the day. When you hear someone speak for themselves, a Lakota grandmother, an Ojibwe grandchild, it breaks down barriers. It challenges the caricatures and stereotypes that fuel the hate groups. It is so important that we open up this dialogue. You don't have to agree with what you hear, but you begin to understand where people are coming from. That's the beginning of peace. I think the media can be the greatest force for peace on earth. Unfortunately, all too often it's wielded as a weapon of war.
On Thursday, award-winning independent journalist Amy Goodman announced she's going to turn herself into authorities in North Dakota over an outstanding warrant. The charge, doing her job.
The state of North Dakota has issued an arrest warrant for me that didn't happen when I was there, when the Democracy Now! Team on September 3rd was covering what's taking place in North Dakota, which is really historic. You have the largest unification of Native American tribes from Latin America, the United States, and Canada, who are struggling right now for nothing less than the fate of the planet.
On September 3rd, Goodman and a Democracy Now! Team released this report.
We're standing at the construction site of the Dakota Access Pipeline.
Protesters advance as far as a small wooden bridge. Security unleashes one of the dogs, which attacks two of the Native Americans' horses. It was Labor Day weekend, Saturday. They were going to plant their tribal flags at the site of the tribal burial grounds. And what they saw there were bulldozers in full gear, desecrating their, what they considered their sacred sites.
Showing security for the Dakota Access Pipeline, physically assaulting nonviolent, mostly Native American land and water protectors, pepper spraying them, unleashing attack dogs, one of which is shown with blood dripping from its nose and mouth.
And she's still standing here threatening you.
Why are you letting her dog go after the protesters? It's covered in blood.
You know, we were filming one dog whose mouth and nose were dripping with blood. The dogs bit a number of the people on the ground. And it was terrifying. As Winona LaDuke, the indigenous leader from White Earth Reservation in northern Minnesota, said, to the governor of North Dakota, Jack Dalrymple, you are not George Wallace. This is not Alabama. This is not 1963. Sicking dogs on protesters.
It wasn't until 5 days later, Goodman was charged with one count of criminal trespass, and a warrant was issued for her arrest. She could face up to 30 days in jail if convicted. The gripping report produced by Goodman and her team was picked up by mainstream media outlets and viewed by millions.
We released that video that night, and it went viral immediately, 14 million views, and it's way beyond that. And the networks all took it. I call it trickle-up journalism. NBC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC, NPR.
Goodman's story was crucial evidence that countered the police statements, which was repeated verbatim in many media outlets, that the protesters were violent or they attacked the security forces.
The editor of the Bismarck Tribune apologized for their coverage the next day when they just brought out the views of the sheriff, who wasn't even there, and the security guards. We were there on the ground. I talked to the security guards and the protesters alike. The security guards didn't want to talk very much, but they said a few things. And we captured the entire scene on the ground.
Corporate media has largely ignored or downplayed the coalescing movement against the Dakota Access Pipeline. But as the Real News and other independent media has reported, the fight against the pipeline has already spawned the largest conversions of Native American tribes in recent memory.
Exactly. I mean, the reason they took our footage, and, we welcome them, steal the story, please, is because they weren't there. And so they showed all over the world, this video got shown. We left the next day, but 5 days later, on the eve of a major court decision, the North Dakota governor, Dalrymple, called out the National Guard. And on that same day, the state of North Dakota issued an arrest warrant for me. I think it's very clear what's taking place, and that is that the authorities in the state of North Dakota don't want us shining our cameras where it matters, for people to be able to speak for themselves, to describe their own experience. Democracy Now!, this daily grassroots global news hour, covers movements. It's our job to go to where the silence is.
McLean County State's Attorney Ladd Erickson, who was trying the case, told the Bismarck Tribune, quote, "She's a protester, basically. Everything she reported on was from the position of justifying the protest actions."
The important issue is that the prosecutor is raising the content of our coverage. That is why we have a First Amendment. It's the separation of the state from journalism. We are not supposed to have state journalism here. There's a reason why our profession is the only one explicitly protected in the U.S. Constitution, because we're supposed to be the check and balance on power. If the state doesn't like what we are reporting, that is not an arrestable offense. And if it is, our democracy is in big trouble.
The protests are not letting up. 27 were arrested on Tuesday. This week, another media professional, award-winning filmmaker Dea Scholzberg, was charged with 3 felony counts for covering a protest. She could face up to 45 years in jail.
These are historic frontline struggles. It's our job to be there. It's our job to cover them. The state might not want us to shine the spotlight here, but that is what we are supposed to be doing. The First Amendment is not only about the press and freedom of the press. It is important because it's about the public's right to know. In order to have a meaningful democracy, people have to know what is happening so they can make up their own informed minds. That's why it's so important that we're on the front lines covering what's happening. People are putting their bodies on the line. Quite literally, people are putting their bodies on the pipeline. It's a historic struggle by all accounts, and it's our job to be there. They shouldn't be arresting journalism.
Hundreds have been arrested protesting the $3.8 billion pipeline that would span 5 states if completed. It's being backed by wealthy financial interests, and Donald Trump has personal investments in the pipeline. He nor Hillary Clinton have publicly commented on its construction.
Well, Jess, so look at the period of time we're in. At a time of a presidential election that is absolutely critical. The debate's hardly raising the issue of climate change. The vice presidential debate in the midst of Hurricane Matthew as 1,000 people were dying in Haiti. At least 39 people have died in southeastern United States and North Carolina. A number of them died of drowning, and the rivers are rising. This is an absolutely critical time to take on this issue. And if the elected leaders are not doing it, the people who are doing it are on the ground. It's our job not just to put a microphone to those in power, cover these debates where they're not asked about climate change. You know, we're talking about the fate of the planet. Democracy Now! Goes to every UN climate summit. You know, we were there in Copenhagen and Cancun. We were there in Durban and Doha. We were there in Peru and Poland and Paris this past year. Marrakesh is the next one up in Morocco. Climate change is a critical issue of the day. It's the media's responsibility to question these politicians about this. And if they're not going to do it, it's our job to get out there and cover the people who are. And the people who are on the ground right now in North Dakota, and it's our job to be there.
Goodman has a long history of cutting-edge journalism and putting her own body on the line to expose human rights abuses. Her work has earned dozens of awards, including the 2008 Right Livelihood Award, considered the alternative Nobel. Goodman is set to turn herself in on Monday. For The Real News, this is Jessel Noor.